Hi there, Nate Urandi, Orion Training Systems. Gonna apologize for the froggy voice. Definitely picked up something on our travels back from Costa Rica. Fantastic trip as always, but picked up a bug and it's lodging itself in the chest. Feels like a purple day, by the way, so uh, changing up the color a little bit. In any case, I just finished an experiment of one, so certainly is it in no way massively scientific, but I think the data points are relevant, and I've got some notes, so if you see my eyes wander, it's because I want to make sure that I'm getting my thoughts out coherently here as I look at the notes. But basically, um, as everybody knows, was a former world-class triathlete, now a master cyclist, and I specialize in time trialing and climbing. Really enjoy the climbing, and during climbing season, where the races are generally June and July, you try and strip away a little more weight. We're in the heart of the cycling season at that point, so you don't want to get too crazy, but any less weight that you can or any weight you can shed so you're carrying less weight up the mountains here in Colorado, the better. So I wanted to experiment on myself around this whole idea about shedding as much weight as possible and looking at these skeletal riders, and supposedly they're doing this naturally yet retaining all of their power. And basically from Labor Day, which here in the States is the beginning of September, until now, I did this. Actually, it was August. I started probably mid-August, actually. So call it 3 months total of trying to see and manipulate that. And I did it through um, volume reduction, hitting the weights super hard, 4 to 5 days a week to gain strength, but also really heighten my metabolism. Doing 15 to 30 minutes of cardio right after the weight sessions, and as often as possible doing high intensity training, so short intervals, 30 seconds to 1 minute in length with recovery between, to further amp my metabolism. And I coupled that with intermittent fasting, and it would typically be 18 hours of no eating, 6 hours of eating. So I give myself a 6 hour window to eat from lunch to dinner, and then from dinner to the following day's lunch, nothing, which wasn't comfortable, but I was trying to, again, see what would happen. And so the whole point is, you know, would I be gaining weight from all of the weightlifting because I was taking in enough calories, or was the deficit in calories, which would then force my body to feed off its fat stores and lose weight naturally and make me leaner, also catabolize the muscle that I was trying to gain? I didn't know what was going to happen, so let's see. So, again, I outlined everything that I did. Overall, I felt fine once I mentally overcame my tummy is growling, psychological aspect. So there was some discomfort there, but sometimes I deviated, and it was more of a 16-hour, 8-hour fasting versus eating window, but typically it was 18 and 6. Largely, my workouts were just fine. I didn't notice any deterioration in output. Certainly, there were days that I was tired, but I didn't think that was any worse than what I typically felt. And my output in the weight room kept going up, which to me was the most important sign as far as was I catabolizing myself or not. My weight started to climb at first, and I thought this intermittent fasting isn't doing anything, and I'm not even sure that it does, because it's still a math equation of fewer calories in than calories out. If you don't do that, it doesn't matter if you eat one meal a day. If you eat 5,000 calories at that one meal, you're going to blow it out like a puffer fish. It just doesn't matter. But at first, I was getting up to a weight close to 150, which for me is huge. Normally, I run in the low 140s. Maybe I balloon up to 144, 145 in the off season, but then I'm down around 140. Maybe I tip into 139 for climbing season, but typically 140, 141 is my sweet spot for that June, July climbing competition. But I got up to just about 150, and I thought, okay, what am I not doing here? But then all of a sudden my weight started to drop. And I actually got down to 142 or 143. Yet again, I was retaining the size and strength that I had accumulated. But towards the end of this, and I stopped mid-November, so after 3 months, I was feeling a deeper fatigue post-workout. And I also started sleeping like shit for the last month or so. At first, everybody sleeps horribly here or there. So at first, I didn't think of it. But then when I saw the pattern and it kept and persisted, I was like, okay, the only thing I've changed in my day-to-day life is this experiment. I've been running it long enough where I'm starting to feel some ill effects. But I wanted to extend the discomfort a couple more weeks just to make sure it wasn't a blip. It was a pattern, and in fact, it was a pattern. I was on that razor's edge. And, you know, basically the punchline of all this is my assessment, and even though, like I said, it's a non-scientific experiment of one, my assessment is that there is no way in hell you're getting that thin and retaining all of the power without drugs. The negative impacts of doing it are crazy. And remember, I constrained my volume. I gave my body more time for recovery. And I had 2 days off a week as well. So it wasn't like every day I blitzed myself. It was strength training more than I used to. It was shorter periods of cardio. Some of those were high intensity. Some of those were recovery and or aerobic, and 2 days completely off. My overall volume for the week was probably 5 hours on average, 4 to 6, call it. And so, on the outside, I looked great. I mean, more muscle, leaner, more veiny, if you will, on the arms and, and on the upper thighs, and, more of a 6-pack than, say, a 4-pack, however you want to quantify that. But, I could tell that if I kept doing this, and I have overtrained in the past enough to know where this was headed. And so if you get yourself to that razor's edge as you're heading into, say, a Tour de France, a 3-week race, you're going to tip yourself over the edge and implode during that race because you haven't given yourself any wiggle room for error. You would absolutely start to catabolize yourself because it's very rare that somebody comes out of a 3-week race weighing more than when they entered it. I pulled the plug because we went to Costa Rica, and I thought, great, vacation, let's get back on the rails and put this experiment behind us. But, again, there is no fucking way that riders or any athletes, but in this case, riders who are at the very top of the game get as rail thin as they do naturally and without some sort of drugs, whether it's corticosteroids, salbutamol, whatever the cocktail is that gets them to just put a put a blowtorch to the fat. You know, another thing that I found interesting is that my joints didn't feel as lubed up and smooth as they normally did. And my connective tissue was most definitely more fatigued and less elastic, despite the fact that I was drinking more and more water, partly because I wanted to fill my stomach so I didn't think about food, but also because I wanted to make sure that I was adequately hydrating and giving my body what it needed. Um, no injuries, but it wouldn't surprise me if I got injured keeping this up. Um, it's clearly a case of too much of a good thing turns into a bad thing. So, um, here's one more negative impact of all this experimenting. The corners of my fingers, especially on my middle fingers and index fingers, um, started splitting open. And normally this happens as it gets colder here in Colorado and the body adjusts from warm to cold weather. I get it maybe once on either finger, on either hand, I should say, and then my body's adjusted and it's done. I had 4 to 5 splits per hand, and they were never healing. And so they're healed now because we went to Costa Rica where it's super humid and warm, and it was amazing how quickly they healed, and I got off this kick. So I attribute that absolutely to the lack of vital nutrients that my body was starting to feel towards the tail end of this experiment. So to be clear, um, you know, there are some mounting negative impacts, even as there were positive benefits. And the negative impacts absolutely started to outweigh the positive impacts. And also, to be clear, when I was eating the full range of food. I was eating plenty of protein, fats. I was not restrictive at all from a caloric perspective or a what do I eat perspective. It was simply shrinking the window of time in which I was eating and expanding the window when I wasn't eating. So I'll leave you with that. I'm not, I don't know what the point is, other than I just wanted to see, what would happen if I did something that seemed similar to the bullshit we're fed by the media, by the riders, by the teams. Oh, he just lost the fat, whatever the hell that means. Um, it's not a recipe for success, it's a recipe for disaster. As strong as I felt, as good as I felt, the prospect of riding my bike as hard as I normally do for as long as I normally do, it had no appeal whatsoever. So if you go into a 3 week race looking skeletal and on that razor's edge, you're not going to want to ride your bike for 3 weeks, let alone ride it as hard as you can to try and win a race that's 3 weeks long. So again, leave you with that. Don't try this at home. um, but in any case, welcome your comments and thoughts. And as always, happy training.